Hello, today I'd like to introduce you to magenta.nvim, which is a new plugin written for neovim that is focused around introducing agentic large language models to your neovim developer workflow. So something akin to Cursor Compose, Kodi, or Windsurf. The idea is that as agents get better and better, they're going to become better at tool use. And so instead of doing a lot of work to provide smart context to language agents like tools like Aider do with the repo map concept and PageRank algorithm, the idea here is that you have the agent use the more modern tool use functionality that providers like Anthropic and OpenAI provide now to invoke the tools and to actually gather context about your code base. So let's take it for a spin. Okay, so here I am in neovim, and I'm using LeaderM to toggle the chat option. This is also exposed via the magenta toggle command. So this brings up two buffers. There's a input buffer and a display buffer. The input buffer is where you can put your prompt, and the display buffer shows the chat so far, and it's a more enriched display of your conversation. So let's just start with a simple hello world. So yeah, basic chatting. That's not too bad. Let's do something a little bit more interesting. So in the GitHub, there's an issue, which is that currently system prompts are not applied to all providers, but are only applied to the Anthropic provider. So let me try and use the LLM to solve this issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the Anthropic provider file. Here we can see our system prompt right here. And then I'm also going to open the generic provider. Okay, so I have some buffers open. The Anthropic provider provides a system prompt, but I would like it to be a more general setting that applies to all providers. The general provider interface is in provider.yes. Can you update the code to make the system prompt apply to all providers? All right, I'm going to kick this off. So you will see that the agent is able to gather context about my workspace by getting a list of open buffers and then reading individual files. And then once it has a little bit to think, it proposes some edits. And then eventually stops. So you can see at the bottom, there's a stop reason. And here we have several proposed changes. So this display buffer is enriched view and provides some interactivity. So if I scroll around, I can see previous tool executions that the agent was able to do automatically. If I press enter on one of these lines, it will expand out and show me what tool was used and what parameters the tool invocation had, and also what the result of the tool invocation was. My goal in developing this plugin was to just go for transparency and just try to make it as easy as possible to understand what is going on when interactions between the developer and the LLM break down. Hitting enter again can hide them from you. So let's take a look at what the agent has proposed here. If I press enter over this review edits section of the display buffer, it will bring up the proposed edits for this file. So here, neovim provides some defaults, key bindings. So using square brackets and C, I can jump between different chunks. And then using DP, I can accept the chunk. Here are some changes that the agent proposed, and now I've reviewed them. And I will quit the diff buffer, which then lets me go back to editing my thing. Yeah, so this was a little mistake that the agent made. So maybe we'll just fix that up. Okay, and that looks pretty good. So here, what it's done so far is it pulled out the default system prompt from the Anthropic provider, and it looks like it also put the system prompt up as a top level property on the provider object. That's not exactly what I want. I guess let's just go for it and see how it does. Okay, so then let's go back to reviewing the second file. Now these are changes to the Anthropic provider itself. So let's take a look at those. So here it's defining a system prompt now as a property on the provider object. And when it's passing it in, it is using that property instead of hard coding it. So that seems pretty good. All right, and now we have a couple of issues. So it seems like it didn't handle in the import here. So I'm going to import it and we're good. All right. So this isn't exactly it because I also have other providers. So let me say that I have some other in the providers directory. Could you make sure they all adhere to this new pattern? So this should be able to list the directory, find the providers and read them and update them. So now I have some more edits. So let's see how it did. So this is the OpenAI provider. So it added the default system prompt. I think I just want that change here. All right. And then we'll define it here. And then when it looks like the right way to provide this for OpenAI is to add a system message at the beginning of all the messages. So it seems to have figured out the right way to apply it as well. So that's great. Looks like we don't have any errors. And then let's look at this other file. And this is doing something similar. So this is the mock provider that is used for testing. And it looks like it didn't do a great job here. And I'm not sure why it added that. Oh, okay. It messed up the, okay. So here we go. So that's just a short example of how you might use this in your development workflow to make edits to some files. Some other features that I've sketched out so far. Here you can clear the chat using bleeder C or the magenta clear command. So I've also added a couple of other features. So if I type in leader MC, that will pin the current file to the context, which will then appear here. So then I can say, what does this file do? And that will be the current content of the buffer if the buffer is open, or the file if the buffer is not open will be sent along to the model, and it will be continue to be sent every message as long as it's part of the context, which will always appear at the bottom here. If I want to remove it from the context, I can just press enter on this bottom section, and that will be removed. I also hooked up FCF Lua with this, so leader MF will bring up a FCF Lua selector. Here you can pick the files that you want, maybe to include a couple. And then when I do that, all of those files will be included in the context, and then I can drop them one at a time if I want. Another thing that I spent some time doing is integrating this with the neovim LSP provider. So for example, I have this file here, which has a diagnostic error. I can clear this and ask, hey, I have a file opened in the buffer called test.ts. Could you try figuring out what the type of nested is? So this actually uses the LSP client that's embedded into neovim, and the agent can make requests against that LSP client that's attached to this buffer. And currently this supports hovering a symbol and also getting the LSP diagnostics from the buffer. So I can say, it seems like this file has some errors. Could you check? So it's able to read the diagnostics and then respond based upon those. There's also a couple of convenience methods. Leader MP will take the content from the buffer and insert it into the insert buffer so that you can quickly populate the context like that. So this was a quick demo of the functionality of the plugin. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the choices I made around the development of this plugin. The first one is that this is actually a remote plugin that is written in Bun. Bun is a JavaScript and TypeScript runtime that is an alternate to Node. So the reason I chose Bun is reducing the delay in terms of bringing the plugin up. And yeah, I just found the tooling around it to be pretty nice, especially with regards to native TypeScript support. I'm not super attached to it, but I thought it was a neat thing to try out. I think the choice of TypeScript is particularly useful. I think one of the most complicated parts of many plugins that I've seen that have to do with language model use is the integration with the language model itself. So authentication and the interaction with the API, especially around things like tool use and streaming. of responses. So because we are in TypeScript, we have access to the SDKs that the LLM providers have created for us. So if you want to take a look, for example, at the Anthropic one, just using the Anthropic SDK makes it relatively easy to set up the stream, authentication, and tool use, which I think greatly simplifies this plugin and makes it a lot faster to develop. The other thing that TypeScript provides is access to the async await tooling. So when writing things like the diff setup, we can make it an async function. And I think this provides like a very nice way of doing asynchronous operations and defining these sorts of command chains. I also spent a lot of time making this buffer, the display buffer and the interactivity nice. In order to make this view that has a rich structure and supports streaming and has interactive elements, I spent some time implementing a declarative view system that leverages JavaScript's template strings literals to define these views in a declarative way. So here, for example, is the review edits button. You can use the template to declare what you want it to look like and to declare the bindings that you wanted to have. And the framework handles seeing where the view deviates from the declaration and updating just the parts that need to be updated. So this is similar to a virtual DOM system in the browser and makes it, I think, much easier to declare these more complicated interactions. The other thing that's interesting about this is that the whole app actually is built around the idea of the Elm architecture. So if you look at any one of these, so if we look at the main chat component or any component within the system, you can see that they have a model, a message type, and an update function. Where is it? Here we go. An update function. So this makes things pretty nice to set up and extend. It makes it very straightforward to figure out how to add functionality to the system in places where you need to. It actually makes it pretty nice for code generation as well, because it is fairly uniform and fairly straightforward for the coding assistants to follow. So it makes it nice for testing and also unlocks some future features, like because the models tend to be serializable, we will be able to take the state of the chat and persist it into a file and resume from previous chats if that is something that we want to implement. So one more thing that I want to show is this is actually a hybrid plugin that uses a newer remote plugin setup. So rather than using the remote plugin manifest or something like that, there's a Lua component to this, which has this start function. And what this will do is start the bun process using this Vim event job start thing and set up, which then sets up a socket-based RPC communication between this process and the other process. So what this means is that there's no need to do update remote plugin every time because all of the commands and things like that are defined here on the Lua side. Where is it? Yeah, so the user commands and auto commands are all defined on the Lua side. And this, I find that this setup of having some Lua components and some bun components is pretty nice. It means that you can use the best tool for the job for each part of the plugin development process. What else? I guess the one last thing that I would like to mention is the testing setup. I spent a decent amount of time setting up testing and making sure that at least the core components, like the view rendering code, was fairly thoroughly tested. Okay, so the way that the testing setup works is that the bun process actually creates a socket and kicks off a fresh neovim process for each test that then connects to the same socket. And so the bun process can drive the neovim instance and observe the state of the plugin, which makes it pretty convenient to write some pretty robust tests, including like end-to-end tests for certain commands working. And combined with the TypeScript async await syntax, it makes for fairly readable and easy to write test setup, which I think was very convenient and has helped improve the stability of this plugin considerably. Okay, I think this is in a pretty good place. As you could see by the demo, it is fairly usable now. I do think that there's still a lot of improvements to be made, especially around adding additional providers and having nicer neovim integration. So far, I've only sketched out some tools around FCF Lua, but it would be really nice to integrate this with completion frameworks or other selectors like Telescope or MiniBic. So yeah, I would really welcome contributions. I tried to document things as best as I could. There's a contributor guide that kind of walks you through and puts up links to help you get familiar with the dev setup and things like that in the contributing guide. So I am looking forward to your contributions. Thank you so much.